At first light, the strangest thing in the Blackroot Basin was not a horse, not a wagon, not a man. It was a roof. Halfway up a bare shale shoulder, one roof stayed dark with meltwater, while every sensible house on the valley floor had turned white with rime. Down by the creek, the cabins looked exactly where a frontier cabin should be, close to water, close to flat land, close to the cottonwoods. But 55 feet above them, where the slope turned mean, stood the house of Stefan Markovic. It was the stupidest place in the basin to build. Every bucket of water had to be hauled uphill, every log had to be dragged uphill, every winter need had to be carried to a place nature did not seem to want people living. That was why the men below laughed, and by January, those same men were burning twice as hard, sleeping wetter, and staring up at that uphill house like it had insulted them personally. Because the fool above them was right, the question was no longer whether Stefan Markovic had chosen the wrong place, the question was what he knew about that valley that they did not. And the answer was not hidden in the ground, it was hidden in the air. Stefan Markovic was not a farmer. A farmer looks first at bottom land, black soil, easy irrigation, straight furrows, a short walk to water. Stefan had spent his first life in the Dinaric highlands of the Old World, where men watched fog the way other men watched prices. He grew up among sheep tracks, stone walls, and ridges where a bad camp could kill lambs before sunrise. His people did not speak about land as if land alone decided anything. They spoke about drainage, about frost hollows, about where the dew lingered, about where a sleeping herd would wake stiff, and where it would wake merely cold. His grandfather had taught him a rule before he was old enough to lift a real hammer. Never sleep in the bowl if the night is clear. Cold moved, not like a storm, not like a gale, more quietly than that. On calm nights it slid downhill, hugged the ground, and collected in hollows as if gravity were pulling an invisible river through the dark. A camp set 30 paces too low could wake rimed over, while one above it stayed bearable. That lesson followed him farther than almost anything else he owned. He reached western Montana in the spring of 1892 with one trunk, a bedroll, a crate of tools, and his sister's daughter, Katerina. His wife was gone, fever had taken her before the crossing. A failed season and 2 hungry winters finished the rest of the argument. America sounded like a place where land still existed faster than memory did, and the Blackroot Basin looked merciful at first glance. A creek crossing, cottonwoods, grass along the bottom. Shelter from the wind, room to plow. Exactly the kind of place practical people choose. Their first winter in a rented creek bottom cabin taught Stefan to mistrust every part of that first impression. At sunset, smoke from the chimney would rise a little, flatten, and spread low over the basin like dirty cloth. By midnight the floorboards felt cold from below. The blankets never truly dried. Tallow turned stubborn. Bread rose badly. Water left too far from the stove skinned over with ice before dawn. Katerina woke some mornings with her hair damp at the temples, from her own breath freezing and thawing in the dark. The others fought the same war. Tight cabins, good stoves, heavy doors, mud-chinked seams. And still the cold came for them from every side. It pressed through the floor, leaned against the walls, slipped under doors, fell down chimneys when the fires were banked. It made the inside of a house feel not merely cold, but occupied by cold. Stefan stopped watching the snow and started watching the basin, where frost lingered longest after sunrise, where fog settled first, how low smoke spread on still evenings, which willows kept their white edge deeper into morning. By February, he was sure of it.
The cabins were not failing because they were badly built. They were failing because they had been planted in the bottom of a nightly cold reservoir. Katerina did not understand it at first. No one did. When claim stakes were being discussed that August, the best parcels lay where everyone expected them to lie. Broad in the bottom, close to water, easy for teams and plows. Stefan walked past all of them. He climbed the west side of the basin with his eyes above the grass line, and stopped on a narrow shelf of shale and bunch grass halfway up the slope. Below them, the creek flashed in the sun like tin. Above them, dark timber. The shelf itself was inconvenient, exposed, and poor. Katerina stared at him. Here? Here. There is no field. I know. There is no easy water. I know that too. She looked back down at the basin. Then why here? Stefan pointed not at the ground, but at the empty space above the grass. Because the cold sleeps down there. Word spread fast. It always does in a small valley. The loudest skeptic was Amos Bell, a cattleman with good fences, a good team, and the confidence of a man who had always chosen the obvious answer, and usually been rewarded for it. Amos rode up while Stefan and Katerina were levering foundation stones into place. He looked at the shelf, then the path to the creek, then the timber they would have to drag uphill. Vic, he said, a man can make a hard life for himself without paying extra for the privilege. He gestured with his reins toward the basin floor. Flat ground, water close, better soil. You passed all of it. Stefan wiped shale dust from his hands. Yes. And for this. For this. Amos laughed once. By Christmas, you'll be praying for a sled and another back. Stefan gave him the only answer Amos would remember. Water is heavy, he said. Cold is heavier. For a while, even Katerina wondered if Amos might be right. The work was vicious. Every sill log fought them. Every foundation stone had to be coaxed into place on uncertain footing. The path to the creek punished knees on the way down and lungs on the way back up. Then an early October squall hit. Wet snow, hard crosswind. 2 lengths of roof lath tore loose and cartwheeled into the brush. One corner of the half-finished wall shifted enough to turn Katerina pale. That night, inside a canvas lean-to, she finally asked what she had been swallowing for weeks. What if the men below are right? Stefan looked into the fire for a long moment. Then he said, if I am wrong, I have made us a hard life. He looked up. If they are wrong, they have made a hard life for everyone. The next evening, after the wind died and the air went perfectly still, Stefan lit a twist of damp sage until it smoldered and set it in an old tin pan. He handed it to Katerina. Walk down slowly, not to the creek, only until the smoke changes. On the upper shelf, the smoke rose. 20 paces lower, it still climbed. Then all at once, it stopped behaving like smoke should. It flattened, dragged sideways, poured downhill as though some unseen current had caught it by the throat. Katerina. She froze. Stay there. Stefan came down, drove a peeled stake into the ground, and looked across the whitening basin. This, he said, is where the night begins to drown. To understand what he had seen, you have to stop imagining mountain air as one even blanket. It is not. On clear nights, the slopes lose heat fast to the dark sky. The air touching that cooling ground chills first. Once it chills, it grows denser. Once it grows denser, gravity takes over. The air slides downhill through draws, gullies, and open slopes, gathering in the lowest places exactly the way water does. A mountain basin may look sheltered in daylight. At night, it can become a bowl filling from the bottom with the heaviest cold the surrounding terrain can make. That was why the frost on the blackroot floor looked thicker near dawn. Why smoke pinned low over the bottom on still evenings. Why the cabins by the creek needed furious fires just to feel survivable. They were heating rooms inside a cold sink. Stefan's house was not magically warm. It was simply outside the deepest part of the trap. His walls still lost heat. His stove still needed feeding. But the air pressing against his house at night was milder than the air strangling the cabins below. Today, we would call that warmer band on the hillside the thermal belt. The colder pool below is a temperature inversion created by cold air drainage. Stefan did not know those words. He did not need them. He only needed to know where not to sleep. The real proof arrived in January of 1894, when an Arctic high settled over western Montana and refused to move. The sky turned metallic. Sound carried too far. The creek locked up in its bends. Harness leather stiffened like boards. For 8 days, the basin floor lived under frozen punishment. At Amos Bell's house, the stove never seemed to rest. It roared from dark to dark, and still the window edges feathered white on the inside. Damp wool hung near the fire and refused to dry. A bucket across the room filmed over with ice. Amos's youngest boy coughed in the dark, and every silence afterward felt like waiting. Wood vanished at an ugly pace. A man who thought he had stacked enough for winter began looking at his own woodpile like a bank account collapsing under him. Up on the shale shelf, Stefan and Katerina still lived in a severe world, but not a punishing one. Their stove burned low and steady. The window stayed clear enough to see out. Dough rose. Blankets dried. One morning Stefan tipped lamp oil into the funnel, and it ran in a clean stream. Below, the same oil had gone thick as grease in unheated sheds. A thermometer from the trading post told the story in numbers. Near the creek, 28 below. At Stefan's porch, 11 below. 17 degrees. No new stove. No hidden furnace. No trick wall. Just a wiser position in the moving architecture of the cold. The thing that finally broke Amos Bell's certainty was not an argument. It was a fence. One strand on the upper line snapped in the hard cold, and his cattle were pressing where they should not. Just after dawn, he set out with pliers and staples, and the conviction every person in the basin shared. Climb higher, get colder. For the first stretch, the morning behaved exactly as expected. The cold cut at his cheeks. Each breath hurt. The air felt dense enough to resist movement. Then the edge disappeared. Not like stepping beside a stove. Not all at once. The cruelty simply lessened. The air was still cold. Amos slowed. Took a few more steps. Stopped again. He pulled off one glove and held up his bare hand because he no longer trusted what his face was telling him. The cold had felt alive, aggressive, hungry. Here, it felt like air. He climbed farther and saw Stefan's house through the larches, smoke lifting in a lazy gray ribbon from the chimney. Then he turned and looked back down across the basin. The cottonwoods by the creek stood inside a pale lid of frost. The valley roofs looked submerged in a white pool. And for the first time in his life, Amos Bell understood that the basin was not one winter, it was two, and the worse one was below him. He fixed the fence, but that was not what he carried home. He carried an altered map of the valley. Amos did not become poetic after that. Men like him rarely do, but he did become precise. He told his wife, his brother. Then whichever neighbor still had enough humility left to listen. He described the climb. The place where the edge went out of the air, the absurd fact that the harder house sat in the easier layer. People doubted him. Then visited, then saw. By spring, no one laughed when Stefan explained the basin floor as a cold bowl. A county clerk began pointing new claimants toward the benches and shelves partway up the valley wall. 2 orchard men from a neighboring drainage came to look and went away talking not about views, but about blossom-killing frost. Within a few years, the Blackroot Basin had a second line of settlement stitched above the creek on land that once seemed too poor and troublesome to want. Today, builders,
growers, and meteorologists use different language for what Stefan Markovic understood on instinct. Katabatic flow, inversion layers, cold sinks, microclimates. The science is formal now, the wisdom was old long before the science was named. And that is the deepest point of the story. The people on the valley floor were not stupid. They were following a rule that had served human beings almost everywhere. Stay near water, stay on the flat. Choose the easy ground first. The problem was not their logic. The problem was the invisible variable their logic had not accounted for. The easy ground looked safe because it was easy. In that basin, it was miserable because it was low. Stefan Markovic did not defeat winter with superior strength. He did not outwork the cold. He did not build a miracle house. He simply refused to live where the night collected its weight. He saw the river in the air, and instead of planting his life at the bottom of it, he climbed to the bank. If you enjoy stories where old knowledge turns out to be sharper than common sense, subscribe for more.
If you've ever seen a landscape hide a rule in plain sight, tell me what it was. This story is a historical-style reconstruction for educational storytelling. The characters and specific events are fictionalized, but the microclimate principle at its center is real.